The NBA playoffs have arrived, and the best odds on basketball are on Novig. Stop paying sportsbook fees and start making your predictions on America's #1 sports trading app. Check out Novig and use code WOJ to get $50 worth of Novig coins when you spend your first $5. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Please play responsibly.
What it really feels to people is that the NCAA does not want international basketball players in college basketball anymore. Or if they do, they want only the 18, 19-year-olds. Like they don't want the 20, 21, 22-year-olds like we're seeing. And if they do, that's fine. The frustration from college coaches is just let us know what the actual rules are.
And welcome into Jonathan Givony, the founder of Draft Express, my longtime colleague at ESPN and Yahoo. Jonathan, great to have you with us. I know you're on the road, you're scouting, you're evaluating, and the NBA draft is just around the corner. But I want to start, Jonathan, the NCAA, and you were really out front on this and sort of identifying that the NCAA was going to start taking a very different look at international players and what they had earned overseas, the kind of leagues they had played in, and how that was going to impact their eligibility, not going forward 2 years from now or 3 years from now, but in this recruiting cycle when teams and schools have already recruited a number of guys. It's feels like a throwback to what college and international eligibility was in college 4 or 5 years ago. What's changed, Jonathan, and what's the potential impact now on college basketball?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to be with you again. So the NCAA sent out new guidelines on May 8th for their eligibility certification process. This went out to every school in college basketball with a bunch of new rules and new terminology that really was completely unfamiliar to schools before. And so there's a number of things that have changed, but the first thing, like you said, is the timing. Sending this out on May 8th after most schools' rosters have already been completed, after hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts have been signed, and the portal is closed, and really, there's no alternatives. I mean, I think that's where a lot of the frustration is coming from college coaches, where they're saying, if you guys want to institute new rules, fine, but give us at least a 6 to 12 month heads up that we can know what rules we're operating under. So really, I mean, the first change is regarding, leagues that have a minimum salary, and if the minimum salary is above the actual and necessary expenses threshold, then according to this guidelines, anybody that plays in a league like that is, affiliated, compensated by, has a relationship. They don't even look at how much that player made. They're looking at if they had an affiliation with one of those teams. And so we don't exactly know what this means because the NCAA is not giving anybody any real clarity. But leagues that could potentially fall under those guidelines are the EuroLeague, the Spanish ACB, the Italian League, the French League, the Australian NBL, the G League. These are all leagues that have minimum salaries that are, in that $30,000 to $50,000 to $70,000 per year range. And depending on where you live, I mean, the way that they calculate actual and necessary expenses is a little bit complicated. They look at the average monthly salary of a 4 family household in that city, and they subtract their utilities and their rent, and it's a very complex formula. I've seen the spreadsheet. And they're trying to compare that to the actual league salary. And so people don't exactly understand what this means because the NCAA is not really telling anybody what this means. I mean, does it mean that like any player that ever played in the EuroLeague is automatically ineligible with no possibility for reinstatement? That is, how, in the most draconian way, that's how you could look at that. And that also would engulf anybody that plays on like a junior program for one of these Spanish teams like Barcelona, Real Madrid, Valencia. It could, mean like anybody that played for Žalgiris, second team, because like those guys have, they have double contracts. They play in the second division. They play in the first division. The Žalgiris has the option in the Lithuanian league to bring those players up to play in the first league. I mean, their contract is with Žalgiris, which is a EuroLeague team. And so this is where a lot of the confusion is coming from. There could be potentially hundreds of players in this year's cycle that are affected, and there could also be hundreds of players that are affected for next year. And so there's a lot of players who are 17, 18 years old in Europe. They're trying to figure out right now where they're going to play next year before they become eligible to be recruited in 2027. And they're struggling to understand, where should I be signing? Like what are the actual guidelines? And there are some other criteria that fall under this in the SAR guidelines. For example, they talk about league quality. I mean, that's a new term, and I've downloaded these guidelines, 2026, 2025, 2024, 2023. This was never a criteria. So they're going to look at the quality of league that you played on to understand, what type of professional experience you had. And they're going to, on a case-by-case basis, rule like, you're too professional for us. You are, you're medium professional. So you're going to maybe have to lose games. You might lose a season. You might have to repay some money. It all goes back to how much money you actually made. And this is a moving target because this criteria isn't published anywhere. So you don't exactly know, like if I make 25, it's okay. If I make 30, it's not. If it's 35, it's 40. It changes year by year based on inflation and then there's ways to reduce it too. Like if you pay a buyout, then you could reduce it at your taxes, and all this stuff changes year by year. So it's so archaic the way that they do it, and it's so opaque, and so agents, players, schools, they're just trying to understand like what are the actual rules that we're operating under, and can you give us some actual transparency, because it's very problematic, Woj, when you say to somebody, sign a contract with Duke or UCLA or St. Bonaventure, and let's go into this eligibility certification process, and then we'll tell you, like if you're a pro, if you need to sit 5 games, 10 games, 20 games, 30 games, maybe you're not eligible at all. Maybe you need to pay back 10, 15, 20, 50, $100,000. So this is what people are struggling, because it's not fair to look at that in the summer. If people want to know, you're recruiting right now for 2027, for 2028. You want to know which players are eligible and which players aren't. And so it's just so confusing for people. And what it really feels to people is that the NCAA does not want international basketball players in college basketball anymore. Or if they do, they want only the 18, 19-year-olds, like they don't want the 20, 21, 22-year-olds like we're seeing. And if they do, that's fine. But the frustration from college coaches is just let us know what the actual rules are.
The NBA playoffs have arrived, and the best odds on basketball are on Novig. Stop paying sportsbook fees and start making your predictions on America's #1 sports trading app. Check out Novig and use code Woj to get $50 worth of Novig coins when you spend your first $5. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Please play responsibly. Talk about this cycle and how much money has been committed, how many scholarships teams have built around international players, or at least are counting on one or two to be impact players. You saw Illinois go to a Final Four with a team, built around a European core largely. Have you gotten a sense that anybody's gotten players cleared yet, that everyone's still in a holding pattern, that there just have not been rulings yet on the eligibility of guys, or do you find some are starting to get through the NCAA's eligibility center and either being approved or disapproved?
Some are already getting through. It was primarily the 18, 19, 20-year-olds who did not make a lot of money. The guys that are, made $30,000 or less. It's more of and they don't need like an NGB waiver. We should probably define what an NGB waiver is. This is a special waiver that was granted across the board to dozens, if not hundreds of players last year, that basically freezes your clock, while you're in your delayed enrollment period. And so let's say you're a 2021 high school graduate, you have 12 months to enroll in college, and then you have you have essentially a 4-year window from there to play college basketball. An NGB waiver means that you played in FIBA competition, you were a national team player, and you're not allowed to turn down those invitations to the national team. And so with an NGB waiver, you can say, well, I played on in a national team in 2023, and so I could not have enrolled in college basketball. So my clock should have been frozen in that 12-month period, and that gives you another year of eligibility, essentially. And that's where a lot of these 22, 23, 24-year-olds are trying to play college basketball right now. And there's a huge chunk of them. There's probably at least 50 of them. And some of the biggest programs in college basketball enrolled right now. And so that process is completely frozen right now. There are also a lot of guys who played college basketball over the past few years. Like you had Noah Belonga, 2 years ago at St. Bonaventure. He's a 22-year-old who's trying to get another year of eligibility right now. His NGB waiver would be an open and shut process right now under normal rules, but he was already denied. They're telling him, you need to go seek a legislative relief waiver in order to qualify for your third year of college basketball. And so that's the bucket that a lot of these players are in right now. It's completely frozen. They're not approving any of these guys. And that's a major problem for, not just for the LSUs of the world. There are probably half of the SEC is in the same bucket. There are guys that, in the ACC and the Big Ten and the Big 12, and also at a lot of mid-majors, honestly, a ton of mid-majors have looked at this strategy also. We had 41 undrafted players who enrolled in college last year and who are professional basketball players. A year ago, they enrolled. They're going to play in college this year, too. Those guys we think are mostly good, but now they're same cohorts from some of the same national teams, same countries, same clubs. These guys they're either being denied or they're being harassed so much for receipts, of, like meals that they had 3 or 4 years ago, for, bank statements, for their taxes, for contracts from 5 years ago from clubs that don't even exist in some cases now. This is a process that did not exist a year or two ago. And this is where the frustration lies with a lot of programs, a lot of agents, a lot of players who are saying, had we known it's going to be like this, we may have made, very different decisions in this. Maybe we would have gone to the NBA draft. Maybe we would have signed that EuroLeague contract. Maybe we would have extended our contract with our European team. But now we're in this holding pattern. We're in June right now. This could extend well into the spring. Guys could miss games. We just don't know. It's the uncertainty that really is so harmful for a lot of these programs, players, and agents.
Jonathan, I saw sort of a knee-jerk reaction when you first started. You were talking before it was out in the public, you were talking behind the scenes with a lot of your, colleges and international partners with Draft Express that you communicate with, that this was potentially an issue, and trying to educate different schools and agents about what was going on. I think there was some perception that Will Wade's recruiting class at LSU precipitated this. That didn't line up to me in terms of the timing, because this memo went out May 8th. Obviously, if the memo went out May 8th, they've been working on it for some period of time before they release it to everybody. And I know maybe LSU signed it or got some commitments from a couple of guys, and everyone said, well, this is a reaction to that. That seems like it doesn't seem to line up to me. What was your sense of why the NCAA went in this direction to say, hey, we're going to clamp down and we're going to take this all in a very different direction again with international eligibility?
Yeah, I think RG Lewis is the one that a lot of people point to that created this uproar online. And as far as I know, RG Lewis was um, the announcement was it was announced in the middle of May. I think even in the third week of May. If you look at the documents, the actual guidelines that were sent to you guys, you could see in the top left corner it says April 27th. Like for when the actual draft was saved, and so there's some references to April in the guidelines. So obviously, if they've been working on this for months, and this is a reaction to, I think, last year's cycle where there were a ton of guys who were 23, 22, 23, 24, and schools they're pushing, they're pushing the needle here, like how far can we go, with a Yamadar, for example, who is 25, turning 26. He's not going to end up playing college basketball. All this uproar about Yamadar is for nothing. He's not going to, he's not coming. He's not going to LSU. But, and so, yeah, I think that, LSU is an easy target, but there's so many schools in college basketball who are recruited internationally. And the problem really is that there's just not enough players. There's not enough alternative for schools to look at, and people are college basketball is professional basketball right now. You're looking at every player in your league and, in say Bonaventure and the Atlantic 10, there are players making $1 million in the Atlantic 10 now. There are starters, across the board making $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. So the fact that people are so frustrated by, these pros who are making 50, 100, 200,000. We don't want professional players in college. Everybody's professional now in college basketball. You look at an AJ DeBonza, for example. He made millions of dollars before he spent 1 second on campus at BYU. Darren Peterson was the same. You look at the EYBL and Puma and Adidas and Under Armour. They're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to high school players. So who's a professional and who's not? It's very hard to draw that distinction. And, I think they're latching on to a little bit of the political movement that we're seeing in the U.S. right now, where it's very much, America first and, it should be about our Americans and all that and, the immigration process and all that. And so I think that's where some of the commentary from the SEC, for example, that's where that's coming from. So I don't think it's really about LSU. That's an easy one to point to, but everybody in college basketball is looking at international players and everybody's saying, how do I build the very best roster that I can build under the parameter that we're all operating under?
The NBA playoffs have arrived, and the best odds on basketball are on Novig. Stop paying sportsbook fees and start making your predictions on America's #1 sports trading app. Check out Novig and use code WOJ to get $50 worth of Novig coins when you spend your first $5. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Please play responsibly. The 5-for-5 rule, which I think we all expect to be ratified this summer, which puts age limits on players, essentially sort of takes away the red shirt idea in college sports. 5 years to play your 5 years of eligibility, regardless of whether you play one game in a season or you get injured. That was going to impact the international player anyway, especially the older international player, by just putting that guideline in. And that's going to change college roster building regardless of the amount of money a player might have made over there, right? The 5-for-5 with the age distinctions in there, Jonathan, was going to change the way people recruited overseas.
It will, but I think it won't because a lot of these players, they graduate high school when they're 19, okay, overseas, and so if you give them a 5-year window from then, you still are going to be looking at international pros who are 21 and 22 years old who can come play 1 to 3 seasons. And so, everything kind of clicked for me when I saw, this new bill that was introduced last week, by the Protect College Sports Act or whatever, the Ted Cruz thing. And in there, it says that professional athletes are no longer eligible to play in college anymore, and so that was kind of thrown into the bill without any definition for what is a professional. Because it's very ambiguous, because if you look at the way that European basketball is built. Like it's all the club models. These guys join, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Žalgiris when they're 13, 14 years old. They move up the ranks, and when they turn 18, they're getting compensated something. So it's not like our model where you come up through the high school system and everybody's an amateur. Technically, these guys are not amateurs, in fact. So, and this bill was essentially written by the NCAA. You could see everything that was put in there. It's all extremely NCAA friendly. And so once we saw that bill and the discussion about barring professional athletes from playing in not just college basketball, but also soccer and hockey and tennis, international players have flooded all of these sports really the last few years. And I think once you saw that, you kind of started to understand a little bit about where these guidelines came from and why. And obviously these guidelines aren't just pertinent to college basketball. They apply across every sport and hockey too. And so that's where I think it all really it comes full circle for us, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out, because a lot of coaches that I speak to, head coaches in the Big Ten, the ACC, the SEC, they think this bill is dead on arrival, and I think the 5-for-5 model, the age-based model, that is laid out very clearly in this bill too. And so when they vote on this, how does it go through? I think it's going to be on a parallel track with the political process, with trying to push this through. It's supposed to be a bipartisan effort, but we'll see if it could pass through the Senate and the House. And there's so many stakeholders in all this. I'd be very surprised if it passed, because there's a lot of very problematic aspects to this bill for a lot of people, in college sports. And I don't know how much you've gone through it, but it's a very radical thing that they're trying to push through here.
A big thank you to my guest this week, Jonathan Givony of Draft Express. Stay with us for part 2 on the NBA draft and team building in the NBA under the new lottery reform. Look for that later this week.